We will wait about 30 seconds so that everyone can join the meeting. Just before I introduce everyone and welcome everyone to the event. So it's just going to be like 15 more seconds of silence, hopefully, and then afterwards we'll have an exciting event. Okay, so I just got the go from our technician. So a warm welcome everyone to our Zoom event today, Who's Afraid of Populism? What to expect from the 2022 Brazilian presidential election. My name is Simon Alberts and I'm a scholarship holder of the Friedrich-Naumann-Foundation, and together with my colleague Mariana Davi, who will introduce herself later, I will be leading us through this event and the complicated and exciting questions regarding this upcoming election. This event is held in cooperation with the Lower Saxony Bureau of the Friedrich-Naumann-Foundation and the Rudolf von Bennigsen Foundation. Afterwards, if you're really interested in elections and you can't get enough of them, we have an upcoming event on the Israeli elections right after this one. So if you care to join that one, there will be a link in the chat so you can sign up later. Before handing off the reins to Mariana, just a couple of answers to your questions, how you can participate and engage in this Zoom meeting. You will not be seen by any speaker, you will not be heard by any speaker, but you can participate, and please actively do so via the Q&A function, and we will ask the questions after the lectures of both speakers. Please be reminded not to abuse the Q&A function, and please keep your tone objective and reasonable. But I think this goes without saying. And with that being said, once again, thank you for joining us today, and I'll give the floor to Mariana Davi, who will introduce us to the course of the event.
Thank you, Simon, and thank you everyone for attending our event. And a special thank you for both our invited speakers today, Magno Krall and Thiago Mitro. It really is a pleasure to have the two of you to discuss such an important topic. We really appreciate you taking a bit of your precious and disputed time to bring us your view and analysis of Brazil's current political landscape. And so just to introduce myself very briefly, I'm doing my doctorate here in Germany, in Frankfurt. I'm also a scholarship holder from Naumann-Stiftung, and I'm also Brazilian. So yeah, that's how the idea of the event took place in the first place. Just a small introduction, as we know that most of our listeners are not necessarily up to date with Brazil's last political happenings. 2022 is an election year in Brazil, and the election will take place this October in 2 rounds, and it is a direct vote. And so the 2 most voted candidates in the first round will run against each other in the second round, and the one with more votes will be our next president. And currently, our polls are showing that the second round will be disputed between our current president, Jair Bolsonaro, and our former president, Lula. And those two represent, in our view, 2 sides of populism, one from the right wing, one from the left wing, but both populists. And maybe just to add another element to the populism discussion today. Yesterday, in the House of Representatives voting session, it was just approved in first round a constitutional amendment that basically makes it legal for the government to distribute benefits to different sectors of our society, of our Brazilian society, in order to gain basically political support, and curiously enough, just an election year. And only 14 deputies voted against this measure. Brazil has 513 members in the House of Representatives, from which Thiago Mitro is one of them. His party, the Liberal Party in Brazil, Partido Novo, was the only party to orient its members to vote against this populist measure, and we can discuss a little bit further about this. And so to discuss this and the, I would say, perhaps tragic outlook for Brazil in the next months, we will have Magno Krall and Thiago Mitro, as I said. Magno is a political scientist and the executive director of Livres, Brazilian liberal political movement. He has a BA in social science and an MA in public policy, and is currently a doctoral candidate in the University of Erfurt. He has articles published in the Wall Street Journal, the Daily Telegraph, Forbes, and many other vehicles. He's currently in São Paulo. And Thiago Mitro is a federal deputy, as I said, elected by the Brazilian Liberal Party, which is called Partido Novo. He's currently the leader of Partido Novo in the House of Representatives and member of the Parliamentary Front for Administrative Reform. He's also associated with Livres and some other organizations for political sustainability and renovation. And as my colleague Simon has said, we'll have the possibility of taking your questions in the Q&A session. And so feel free to use it during both speeches from our invited guests. And so now I will start by giving the word for Magno Krall, who will bring us his view on the challenges Brazilian liberalism will face this year. Please.
Well, thank you, Mariana, for the introduction. Thank you and Simon for putting this meeting together. It's very important to me because I was also a scholarship holder of the Naumann Foundation for 2 years while I was in Germany. I will share with you some slides just to guide my my talk. I don't want to go too deep into numbers and anything. I have 20 minutes, so I'll just give you a broad perspective on what's going on. As soon as I find it here, I will share with you. Just a second. I opened something else. It's crazy. Just a second. I promise. Why did I do this? So yes, I will present and share my screen. This one. Yes. So you're all seeing this, right? The challenges of Brazilian liberalism are many. I think I could spend about 5 hours talking to you about each of them, but I decided to take 3 particular points. In 20 minutes, I think we'll give you a good introduction why it is so difficult, why are the main challenges that we face here, but also I will try in the end to close with some hopeful words. 3 points I chose are polls, people, and politics, 3 Ps. Polls are at this point maybe our biggest and most important challenge because we have in Brazil a very socially conservative society and a society that awaits for somebody to come and do something, waits for economic salvation. So we have a society in which the 2 legs of liberalism, as we see it, open and free market, where people are free to trade and negotiate as they wish, hire and fire. They are against it. They would like to have more participation of governments and politicians into this process, but also a society that sees society in general and our interaction, our social interactions, as in a very conservative life, in a way that is still very influenced not only by the Catholic Church that has a massive following in Brazil and has been historically very strong in political terms in Brazil, but increasingly and maybe even more noticeable in recent years of the evangelical Christians as well. So our 2 legs, a free market and a tolerant, open, modern society, are in trouble in Brazil if you think of the current numbers in polls. Just to give an example, I didn't want to pollute my slides with numbers, but just to give an example, 83% of Brazilians believe all drugs should be kept illegal. So there is not even tolerance towards, I don't know, some places are experimenting with marijuana recently. And only recently, there is a small majority for the medical use of marijuana. The same for gay marriage, for example. Gay marriage has been legal in Brazil for more than 10 years, but only recently the majority of the country has been supporting gay marriage and gay adoption. In economic terms, more than 70% of Brazilians believe that the state, that the government, the politicians should be leading investment in society. And more or less the same number of Brazilians, the same percentage of Brazilians believe that the government has a moral obligation of saving companies that are in trouble. So as you may imagine, it's not easy to reach people based on our fundamental principles, our first principles, I would call them. Our second point is people. We also have a very difficult time reaching people when we go over all these the topics that they reject in a sense of principles. We still have trouble getting to them in a way of getting their time. We have a very strong competition with the two major political forces in Brazil that, as Mariana said in the introduction, are the leading forces in Brazilian politics today. So the two main candidacies, as we see it, are two different faces of the same populism. As an example of this bill voted yesterday, or the day before yesterday in Congress, that Thiago, I'm glad to say, voted against it and told his party, this party orientation was to vote against it. His party fully voted against it. We had both politicians on the left and on the right voting for more spending in an electoral year, and spending is not a small amount of spending. So you guys may have a good idea of what it means. It is about $10 billion from now until the end of the year. So these people who are not really into politics, who are not following the reasoning behind those spendings, are not following the consequences of that spending in the future, they are only bombarded by people who supported those actions. So they can only see one side of these measures, which is, well, we are giving more money to people, we're giving tax rebates to people, we're giving fuel vouchers to people, we are giving more social support to people until December, of course, because then after the election is gone, we may go back to a normal life. But it's really hard to reach people since we are such a minority force in society, we're such a minority force in Brazilian politics. It's really hard to get our story through. It's really hard to get our narrative through people. And the second part of it is that people are also not really engaged in the political issues. They only hear about it. Okay, there is a group of politicians who are voting to give people more money so we can have better support from government. And there is these other guys here, the liberals, they are against it. And they are not even following the topics, they're not even following the issues. So they're not even part of political parties, they don't really read the newspaper. So it's really hard to be rational and reasonable when you're arguing basically against lies and against people who only have partial information. So it's hard for us to go over the amount of information that the dominant forces, the populist forces, have, not only in direct reaching the population directly through social networks, for example, but also in the media. They are much better represented in the media than we are. And finally, politics. We, Thiago and I, we are both representatives of the same generation, of this generation that in the last 15 years have been trying to revive these ideas in Brazil, not only in our society, but also in politics. But given the amount of time that we've been out of these debates, that liberals have been out of the discussion, being out of the public debate, we have a massive mountain to climb. And of course, given the size of Brazil and the 200 million plus inhabitants we have in the country, it is a long-term process. So even though we have been fairly successful in recent times, we are still successful in a very secluded part of the country. We tend to do very well in the middle to the south of the country, in the middle to the north of the country. It's still areas that we have to reach, and even in the places where we do better, and it's still hard for us to be a competitive force in Brazilian politics. So we had a generational gap, a generation in which we have basically zero participation in politics, at least in the terms that we like to call it, in the way that we identify ourselves, in a trend of liberalism that we identify ourselves. We basically had zero participation since Brazil became again a democracy in 1985 until very recently in this past decade of 2010. So there is still a massive mountain for us to climb. Unfortunately, it will probably not be in 2022 that will be in the second round of presidential elections. We'll work hard for us to get as many liberal votes as possible for our candidates, for our liberal partners who are running elections today. But it's still a very large path that we have to go through until we are really competitive, or at least in par with what we see liberals in other countries, particularly in Europe, do. Of course, in most countries, we are not the majoritarian force in politics, but at least we are competitive enough to be important for people to talk to us. But why do we keep trying then? And I'll go to quickly here, going already towards the end of my talk. Why do we still believe that it's important to climb this mountain? And why do we think that it's worth climbing this mountain? So I will show you two different portraits of where we were in the 90s and where we were in the last general election. On the left side here, we have the liberal representations in Brazil in the 90s, at the peak of our representation. The Brazilian liberal representation, our actions in societies, were basically based on institutes, intellectual work, the publication of books, the attempt to capture the imagination and the hearts of an elite, in an attempt to cultivate the elite and then hope that this elite will spread those ideas around the country. And based on that idea, the best we could do, the best moment we had was in the end of the 90s, when we had about 8 institutes based in 8 different state capitals, as you can see, mostly at or close to the coast, where the majority of the Brazilian population is concentrated. That was our best case so far. And then that slowly died down as the 90s ended. The funding for those institutes died down. A lot of these people actually died. It was a very old generation, people who had built the business and translated themselves books, did a lot of the work themselves. And as that generation retired, we got that gap I was talking about. And then we moved about 20 years later to 2018, our last general election. And this is where we had not only self-identified liberal candidates, but also we got to elect people. And my organization still has active cells, active chapters around Brazil. As you can see, not only we have a massive difference in numbers, but also we have a difference in a way that we got inside the Brazilian territory, which is poorer areas that we believe need the most of our ideas, but also maybe the most important part and the most important difference that we see here is that we actually got people elected. And that makes a lot of a difference. I'm sure Thiago will talk about it later, and he can speak about that much better and with much more propriety than I can speak about it. But it's very important to actually get people elected. One person sitting in parliament makes a lot of difference, and we got much more than one person to sit there. So it is hard. It is very, very difficult. It's hard to build institutions. It's hard to build structures from zero without having much benchmarks to go through. But we are changing things, and things are much better than they used to be. Just to close and give you an example of my organization of Livres, just last year we had over 1,500 mentions in the media. As a group, as thinking of Brazilian liberalism as a group, as a coalition, as a broad coalition, not only representing my organization here, but thinking of liberalism in Brazil as a big tent. This is a massive thing for us because our first challenge was to exist. Of course, we want to elect people. Of course, we want to have 100 new Mitros in our parliament, but just to exist was a massive step for us. And we have been taking good, persistent, but steady steps towards existing in the Brazilian public debate. And this is something that we're very proud of, that we are building on it. So this year we have even more mentions in the media, we have even more participation in the public debate, even more people can hear about us and our work. And of course, that this year we get even more people elected, not only to the federal parliament, but also to the states' assemblies too. How do we do it? What is our basis? How do we start talking to Brazilian people who are not very well educated? On average, Brazilians spend about 6 years in school only, are not really aware of fundamentals of liberalism. They only hate capitalism. They like making money, but capitalism is a kind of a different story. How do we speak to them? We start from telling them that the market's all of us. We try not to speak of capitalism, but we try to speak about the market. We try to speak about how to take liberalism to everyone, how to make the idea of liberalism popular, how to make the principles of liberalism popular, and bring more people to the market, bring more people to benefit from what the wealth and prosperity the market brings to us, and most of all, make them understand that the market is all of us. Capitalism is not a thing that bankers enjoy, is not a thing that the wealthy people enjoy. The benefits of an open and free market of trading is not restricted to the few wealthy people, but it expands and affects all of us equally, and would benefit and would bring prosperity to all of us if only all of us could have equal access to this market. Thank you a lot. I was very aware of my time. I didn't want to go over my time. I'm open to questions later, and I'm very excited to hear Congressman Thiago Mitro in the last few minutes. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Magno. And just to add a point, congratulations on your recent membership in the Liberal International. It was the first liberal movement in Brazil to ever be part of it. So I'm sure you'll continue to give us a very nice service in the liberal sense. So yeah, thank you so far. And please, Mitro, you can start.
Okay, thank you to the Naumann Foundation, Mariana, Simon, for inviting me here to talk with you. It's a pleasure to be here with Magno, who is a friend and one of our leaders here in Brazil of the liberal movement. I've heard a lot of Naumann Foundation because some of members of our parties have done courses with you in Germany and so on, but it's the first time that I'm having the opportunity to participate in one of your agendas, so thank you for that. I will start just talking a little bit about Partido Novo and Novo Party, which is my party, and myself as well. Then I'll make a speech here based on some guidelines that you asked me to go over. So first of all, I'm someone, I have 35 years old now. I'm someone who was not involved at all with politics here in Brazil until I was 31 years old. I did a business major in university, and then I went to the third sector. I worked for 7 years in a non-profit foundation here in Brazil, focused on helping college students to make better career decisions. And we didn't have any involvement at all with government or with politics, politicians and so on. So I was really focused on doing my job at this foundation and helping these kids be more successful in their careers. And in 2013, maybe you are aware of that, we had a huge manifestations here in Brazil. People were angry with politicians because of a lot of corruption scandals here in the country, and also the lack of public policies and the quality of public services here in Brazil. So people went to the streets. There were millions of people here in the streets all over the country. And 1 year after that, we had elections in 2014, and we had the same options as we had in the previous years. So we were angry with our politicians, but we had to vote in the same politicians that we had always voted and were not really doing a good job. So in 2017, we were about 1 year before the general elections again, because we have general elections here every 4 years. So we had in 2014, we had again in 2011 and 18, sorry. And then people started to decide to do something about it, right? Because we were angry with our politicians, but we were having the same options again and again. So we had to do something about it. So a lot of people who were not involved in politics decided to make a step into it, to give the society options to vote in the 2018 elections. I had some friends, I had a roommate who was working in a consultancy here in Brazil. I have friends who were working in the industry and so on, that they decided to get out of their jobs and run in the 2011 and 2018 elections. And I was kind of influenced by that, and I decided as well to do something about our major problem with the country, which is definitely the lack of quality in our politicians and in the politics, the way that politics is done in a whole. So I decided also to become a politician in a way. Not in a way directly, actually, and I decided to step out from my career in the private sector and run for office for a spot here in the House of Representatives in 2018. And then I joined Novo Party, which was a party that was just had recently registered in 2015. So Novo was founded in 2011, and we were registered in 2015 because there is a long process here to register a new party. And then we participated in the municipal elections in 2016 in 5 cities in Brazil, 5 capitals in different states, and we elected 4 municipal representatives, 1 in each city. And then in 2018, we were running for the first time in a general election. And we had a great result. We had a candidate for presidency who ended in fifth place with 2.5 million votes here in Brazil, which represents more or less 2.5% of the votes as well. And we had also 2.5 million votes for our candidates. Oh, sorry, there is. Oh, I'm really sorry. There is some background noise here because they've called a session here in the chamber yesterday evening, so I couldn't find a room next to the plenary. But can you hear me well, or is it making a lot of noise? Is it okay?
There's a bit of a background noise, but if you focus on your voice, we can understand.
Yeah, sorry. Let me try to find another microphone here. Maybe this other one will work best. So in 2018, we elected, we got 2.5 million votes in our candidates for the House of Representatives, and we had 8 representatives elected. So for the first time we ran in the general elections, we had this many representatives. Was a great success for us, I believe. We are still a minority here, only 8 of 2,513 representatives, but it's 8 more than we had before. So it's a slow process here of making people. Is it better now? I just changed my microphone. No, didn't change anything?
No, it's better. It's better.
It's better. It's improved. Thank you.
Okay, great. Okay, so I just changed. Let me just get this one now. Okay, sorry about that. And it's a slow process here in Brazil, mainly because of what Magno told us here before. But now we are here, right? So for the first time, there is a classical liberal party here in Brazil. And for the first time, we have representatives in the House of Representatives, which makes us able to defend liberalism for the first time as a bench, as a party, and not only as singular individuals who were here before in previous legislatures. So I was asked to talk a little bit about Bolsonaro, who was also elected in 2018 elections, and he was elected with a liberal narrative, right? So he had an economical advisor who is now the Ministry of Economy, which who is Paulo Guedes, who had worked for 30 years, 40 years in his entire career in the private sector here in Brazil and in the financial sector as well, and was someone who was known for being a classic liberal person, and he helped Bolsonaro in the campaign in the economical issues. Bolsonaro, all the time that he was asked about economical issues, he said, "Oh, I don't know anything about economics. That is with Paulo Guedes. So you gotta ask him about economical issues. That's not with me." And so everyone had a lot of expectancy on what Bolsonaro and Paulo Guedes will do once they got into government. And a lot of people from my party voted for Bolsonaro in the second round. I didn't vote. I didn't vote for any of them because I thought it was important to make a statement, as I was also someone recently elected. And I knew that Bolsonaro was not a liberal person, so I thought it was important to cancel my vote, to show people that I knew somehow that Bolsonaro was not someone who had liberal intentions here in Brazil. But in the beginning of the government, they actually did some reforms in a liberal way. So we had a huge pension reform here in Brazil in 2019. We had a bill that was passed on economical liberalism, who gave more power to municipalities here in Brazil in economic matters. So we had some here some spikes of liberal bills and so on. But with the start of the pandemic in 2020, Bolsonaro might have heard of that. He was not someone who dealt in a rational way with the pandemic. So he kind of emulated those negationists here in Brazil, saying that the pandemic will pass really quickly, that we had a lot of there was some medicines that would take care of coronavirus that actually were not efficient. He didn't make any effort to get vaccines here in Brazil to vaccinate our people and so on. And so his popularity began to go down. And he also has a historic of corruptions here. He used to employ people in his cabinet here at the House of Representatives who didn't really work. And there is a kind of a scheme here in Brazil that some politicians do, that they get a part of the salary of their assistants and get back this money for the politicians. And he has a lot of process going on that he supposed did that in his cabinet and so on. And so with his popularity going down and with this corruption scandals process possibly being a problem for him, he kind of made a decision that he would try to co-optate Congress here to evitate to have an impeachment process open here in Brazil. And that changed a lot of the way that government was dealing with economic. And then he completely forgot about all the liberal speech that he had in the campaign, and started passing a lot of bills who went in the opposite way. So he forgot about privatizations. He expanded some public companies. He started having some populist measures, like giving money for people. Of course, that we know that a lot of people here in Brazil were passing through some difficulties because of the pandemic, but the reliefs were done in a much larger way than were necessary. And now we're having another bill being passed, an amendment actually to our constitution on this, what are you calling, kamikaze amendment. Magno also talked about it, which is putting more or less $10 billion in the economy being subsidized to truck drivers, to poor people, and so on, 3 months before the election. So Bolsonaro actually, so he was never a liberal, but his government had some spikes of liberalism, and these spikes of liberalism were each time being lesser and lesser. So now it's completely populism government. I have no expectancy that we will be able to pass more liberal amendments and bills here until the end of the year. And that's actually a problem for the liberal movement here in Brazil, because still a lot of people who voted for Bolsonaro, wishing a liberal government, associate liberalism with Bolsonaro's government, right? We say here in Brazil that one of the main sponsors of the liberal movement here in the country was Dilma Rousseff, because her government was so bad in an economic way that it kind of reintroduced the liberal movement here in Brazil, gave a lot of force to the liberal movement because people decided to do something about it, right? So she had such a bad government that the liberal movement was kind of reinvented here in Brazil. A lot of people joined the liberal movement because of Dilma Rousseff. And now what Bolsonaro government is kind of doing is give the same power to the left, and also make a lot of liberals lose their hopes because well, we've believed in this guy, and now he's doing everything completely different from what we expected. So I have no hopes anymore. I'm going to get out of the country and so on. But on the other hand, this is kind of separating us, the real liberals, from Bolsonaro as well. So this amendment that was voted last night and is still being voted here right now, we were the only party who voted against it. So we have been showing media and the population, society in a whole, the difference between Bolsonaro government and also liberalism. So now we're being able to differentiate ourselves, because when we were still in 2019, we voted with the government a lot of times because they were still doing a lot of liberal movements. So now from 2020 until now, we have been completely different in terms of we didn't change our votes, our way of voting, but as the government has changed, we are voting in a different way than government is. So people can they can be more aware of what liberal politicians would defend and what the government is doing. So it is kind of a problem for us. We have some difficult to reach more people as we were reaching in 2018. But on the other hand, we have increased awareness of what real liberalism is here in Brazil. And also the work that our politicians have been doing here in the House of Representatives is a work that is inspiring other people to become candidates as well. So we have a lot of more people as candidates in this year's elections than we had in 2018. And I'm really sure that we'll be able to have a better party bench next year after this year's elections. We hope to elect about 15 to 20 representatives, which is more than double of what we have right now. And with 15 to 20 representatives, we'll be able to make a lot of more noise than we're doing right now. So I have really good expectancies in this year's elections in about our party bench here in the House of Representatives. And also something else that we have been seeing here in Brazil, as Magno said, the liberal movement in a whole is expanding in Brazil. We didn't have any of these associations here 5 years ago. Livres was founded with another perspective in 2015, I believe, or 16. I don't really know, Magno will be able to correct me. 16, right? Yeah, and then it changed in the beginning of 2018 to be open to all kinds of parties. And now we have much more associates than we had before. And we have politicians associated to Livres in a lot of state chambers here in Brazil, here in the House of Representatives as well, in a lot of municipal legislatives here in Brazil as well. So we are expanding step by step this political liberal movement here in Brazil as well. And I'm really sure that in I don't know, 10 or 15 years time, we might not be able to have, I don't know, 5 or 10 governors in Brazil, maybe not even president. But I'm really sure that we'll be able to have dozens of politicians here in the House of Representatives. We'll have hundreds of politicians elected in our state houses, in our municipal houses as well. And that's going to definitely make a difference because it's this day-to-day contact that people will have with our kind of politicians that will make them sure that there is a way besides populism here in Brazil. There is a way besides the same kind of politicians that we were used to in all these years. So I'm really optimistic about the growth of the liberal movement here in Brazil. Of course, we're having some difficulties with this kind of government that we're facing right now, but I'm really sure that in the long term, we'll be able to grow the liberal movement here in Brazil in a way that we haven't ever seen before. And then we'll be able to give our people more freedom and economical and individual liberties in the country. So thank you very much. Really sorry because of the sound problem here that we had. This spot here where I am was not supposed to be as crowded as it is right now, but I hope you were able to hear me. And thanks again for inviting me. And I'm open here for any kind of questions that you can have. Thank you.
Thank you, Thiago. And just to remind everyone that you can send us questions in the Q&A chat. And I would just want to thank you both. You actually answered several of my questions, but as we have a huge list and the topic is quite extensive, I can start with some topic that you already mentioned sometimes. But how could, and then I ask both of you, Thiago, more into the Liberal Party sense, Magno in the general liberalism in Brazil sense. How can liberalism in Brazil be dissociated from what we know today as Bolsonarismo? Because as you both mentioned, people that supported Bolsonaro and still do, they were or still are in some way connected to the liberal movement and the Liberal Party. And my question is, if we try to distance ourselves from this movement and to this illiberal or sometimes even undemocratic ideas, can the liberal movement and can the Liberal Party survive without those numbers? How is it expected to happen when we see that, for instance, in 2020, the results for the Liberal Party, even though they were better than the last election, they were also below what could be expected. And some attributed that to some of more close connections to the Bolsonarism as a movement. How do you see that when the liberal movement, although growing, is still quite small when you compare to the size of a country as Brazil? And especially when you think that we are going to have more and more I would say the barrier clause in terms of limiting what parties with low representative can do. And so how do you see that in a sense of keeping the purity of the liberal and liberalism, the Liberal Party and the liberalism versus being big and with a chance of actually doing something in Congress?
Thiago, you can answer first. I think it's more on your thing.
Okay. In the 2020 municipal elections, I think that we had a bad strategy as a party. We decided to have candidates in only a few cities. So in my state, which is Minas Gerais state, the second largest state here in Brazil, we have 853 municipalities, and we also have the governor. I forgot to mention that we've elected our state governor in 2018. We only had candidates in 5 cities of 853. So it was really hard to grow when you don't run. So, but in the cities that we ran in 2016 and then we ran again in 2020, we grew in 4 or 5 of them, and in the other one we stayed the same. So Belo Horizonte, which is my state capital, where I'm from, we had one city representative in 2016 who was elected, and then we had 3 in 2018. We were the 14th largest party in 2016 in 2020. We were the 14th largest party in our city in 2016. In 2020, we became the 5th largest party. So we grew a lot. And we also grew in São Paulo, in Curitiba, in Porto Alegre, and Rio, we stayed the same. We also expanded in more states in the south. Santa Catarina state, which is one of the 3 states that we have in the south, we elected 9 city councilors in 2020. We didn't have any city councilors in Santa Catarina state before, so we're growing. So, but it's when you talk about a country of 200 million people and 513 House of Representatives here in the House. Of course, there were only small steps, and I think that we got to go faster. But when we grow faster, of course, we have the chance of having more people that are not exactly aligned with the ideology of the party. But we have to kind of handle that. Okay, every kind of organization that grows has to deal with that, and I think that as a party, you got to deal with that with governance rules, with some strategic projects that will be able to find people aligned with us and making them be the best candidates. So I think that we are able to grow the party, maintaining our ideology, because there are a lot of liberals here in Brazil. There are definitely more than 8, right? So you just gotta convince them to run and make them be elected. Of course, that's a lot of effort involved in that, but I'm really pretty sure that we're able to grow faster, maintaining our ideology. And the examples that we're having right now, Minas Gerais state governor, the bench here in the House of Representatives and so on, is really inspiring more and more people to become politicians. So and we have 20 representatives in the next legislature. We can make a lot of noise. We make a lot of noise here with 8. So with 20, we can already block more bills in the commissions here in Congress. We can have more opposition artifices here in the plenary and so on. So I'm pretty sure that when we're able to show, to have more forces, more arms here in our hands, we'll be able to make a better work and influence more and more people to believe in what we're doing here. So that's what I think that we'll be able to do. And Bolsonaro, he is doing a great job in differentiating himself from liberalism. So that's kind of helping us to show people what are the difference between liberal politicians and Bolsonaro. Bolsonaro was elected with 52 million votes, I think, and now in the polls he's reaching 30%, 28%, which means that he lost almost half of his electorate, right? I don't know anyone who didn't vote for him in 2018 that is saying that it's going to vote in him this year. So he only lost his electorate. He didn't win anyone. So that kind of helps us in a way to differentiate ourselves from Bolsonaro. And I'm really sure that we will have a better result in this year's elections than we had in 2018.
And just to complement what Thiago said, I think there are 2 points in my view. One is that people associate us with Bolsonaro because of Paulo Guedes, because there was a liberal guy in government, there is a liberal guy in government, regardless of what he's actually doing, the way he speaks and the way he identifies himself as a liberal. Well, there were liberals in every administration since Brazil became a democracy again. So we had governments on the right, governments on the left. There were always some liberals in government because, after election is passed, there is a country to run, and liberals have always stepped up to the challenge. And I think we should recognize their efforts, be it in a left-wing government, be it in a right-wing government, of helping to run a country and bring good ideas. And liberals have brought good ideas to governments on the left or on the right. And besides that, we also need to highlight the merits of those politicians who did not take the easy step of aligning themselves with Bolsonaro. Of course, there are a lot of people who identify themselves as liberals, and once they saw the wave in favor of Bolsonaro, they joined Bolsonaro and thought, well, this is our friend now, and let's take advantage of that. And we need to compliment and highlight those politicians like Thiago, who, when actually, as not now the Bolsonaro is very unpopular, but as Bolsonaro was still very popular, who stood in front of an audience and said, you know what, I'm not going to vote for him because he's not one of us. I was there at the event when Thiago said that, and people were booing him, and he was like, yeah, sorry, no. And we need to value these people, because this is where principle is. Right? Everybody who is in politics wants to get votes. Nobody wants to lose. But we need to value those people who, when the situation presents itself, be it when Bolsonaro, there is this populist person who's very popular, and you say, no, he's not one of us, or when there is an issue being voted in Congress, and you need to step up 100 days before the election and say, well, you know what? I'm really against distributing money. I really think this is a bad idea. I think these people need to be recognized, and I think it is a long-term process. We are in it for the long run. We don't want to change the country today. We would if we could, but we can't. So we need to invest in principle, try to take small steps as much as possible, but believe that this is a long-term battle, a long-term strategy, and we need to stick to our principles, try to bring more people in, and try to value and recognize those people who are today making very hard decisions in face of the challenges we have today.
There are some questions from the chat, and almost like a prophecy, Magno has foreseen some of them and answered them in a certain way. But to point it out more directly, there's the question if there's any particular state region in Brazil where liberals are represented more strongly. I think Magno has already talked about the coasts, but is there any state that you could say this is where liberals should focus, and maybe they can actually get into political power there? And also connected to that question is another question, because apparently everyone loves demographics, which is a question not only which state is relevant, but is there a difference between men and women in following liberal parties and liberal principles in Brazil? And do you know anything about that?
I'm sure Thiago knows much better than I do about it, but it's very quickly, yes, we still have a noticeable problem in the attendance, at least, or membership of men and women in our organizations. In my organization, it's still like 70-30, 70% men, 30% women, maybe even worse, maybe 75-25. It's changing, but it's a historic problem that we've had. It used to be much worse. And in terms of votes, the south of Brazil, the 3 states in the south, our ideas are particularly strong. Also in the southeast, which is the wealthiest region in Brazil. Thiago comes from Minas Gerais, and I believe that's our hot spot right now, because his party elected the governor, and I think we have very good hopes for this year's election there too, as well as in São Paulo, where the party has always done very well. Thiago, I'm sure, can speak better about that.
No, that's exactly that. We have more acceptance and the more well-developed, economically developed cities and states. So in the southeast and the south of Brazil, so we elected the governor of the 2nd largest state in Brazil, which is Minas Gerais, and also elected in 2020 the mayor of the 3rd largest city in the south, which is Joinville. It's a city with a lot of connections with Germany, actually, and they have really, really high approval rates. In Minas Gerais, our governor has more than 70% of approval. In Joinville, the mayor has more than 85% of approval. So it's extremely high approval rates, especially in a country where people do not like politicians. So I think that actually in every country, but in Brazil we had all of the struggle in the last years. So in these regions where we already were able to elect people for governor or for mayor, and we also have our members of the legislative branch, there are definitely states where we are able to move faster, but we also want to elect people in different regions as well to plant the seed of liberalism there as well. But especially in the Northeast, which is the poorest region here in Brazil, it's a region where we struggle a little bit more. But we already have some representatives of the liberal movement, not from our party there. And I think that we'll also be able to, in the next few years, elect more politicians there.
Thank you very much for asking that. Maybe I'll just add one more question, just maybe very short. Is there any liberal partner that you could identify as a partner? I mean, Magnus already talked about sticking to your principle, but is there any actual political party that you could ally with?
It's difficult. It's very difficult. What we do in my organization, Libre, is what we do is that we work with politicians from many parties, but it's done in an individual way. So given the political party landscape in Brazil, which is pretty crazy, there's about 34 parties, registered parties in Brazil, which is not necessarily a problem. The problem is that, well, we have more, at least we had more than 20 in Congress. So in the House there, where Thiago represents us, there are 20 different parties. So it's very difficult to navigate that landscape. What we do is that we work with individuals. So we have at this moment people who occupy public office in many different capacities, from city councilors to federal deputies, and they are in 12 different parties, and they associate with us as individuals, not as party members. In another level, I believe it's much harder. Thiago can talk about it as how hard it is over there in Congress.
Yeah, so rely is a strong word. So there's not actually another party that we can rely on, but we do have more partnerships with some parties than with others. Of course, the left parties, we only have small partnerships with them when we're talking about liberal individual liberties. But when we talk on economic issues, then we cannot rely on them at all. And the government, we can rely on some teams. They are aligned with us, but not in a lot of others. So we make more partnerships with some representatives from other parties, and then with a party in a whole. But we're passing through a process here in Brazil of I think that we have that in Germany, which is a barrier for accessing the Congress, right? So we're passing through a process here in Brazil that is going to limit the number of parties that have access here in the House of Representatives. And it's a step-by-step process starting in 2018, is going to go until 2030, which in every elections, the parties that don't have as many votes as this barrier, they won't have access to public funds. They won't have access to a structure here in Congress to support their congressmen. So I think that that's going to make the parties be more centered in an ideology. It cannot be ours, but at least they have less parties that can have all kinds of politicians in there, and that will make them more clear in what are their goals, what they defend, and that's going to make some of those parties make maybe some more current partners of ourselves than we have right now.
Would you maybe have time for one last question? I know that you are still in the voting session, but just one last question and then, okay.
No problem.
So we have a comment saying, coming from the Southeast Asia region, much to be learned from Brazil. I'm just wondering, what are concrete steps to improve representation and accountability to keep voters engaged in the background of disinformations and political propaganda to serve populism? Yeah.
Well, I would say we need politicians and politics in Brazil to be closer to people. I usually tell people over here is that we have 34 registered political parties in Brazil, but when was the last time you walked in the street and you were invited to an event promoted by a political party, or to a meeting, or somebody from a political party just spoke to you? It doesn't happen very often. I don't believe I've ever been invited to one of those, except, of course, for Thiago's party, that they have a noticeable presence in a lot of places in Brazil, and one or two parties on the left that also do this kind of street work. I think this is necessary to bring people closer, like physically closer to politics. I think they need to see more politicians. Politicians in Brazil are kind of rock stars. They don't, they are not normal. They're not treated normally. They don't believe themselves to be normal. And they don't behave normally. They don't go to places where normal people go. So it's very strange. And also, people don't have much contact with their work. Of course, now social media helps a bit, but also information, social media can be very much filtered. And people don't have direct access to what they're doing, except, of course, if you're very much interested in politics, because, of course, we have the channels of the legislative houses broadcasting live the sessions, and you can watch their work until late in the evening. But, of course, most people don't do it. I think technology is bringing us closer. I think there are initiatives that bring people closer to politics. I think a lot more people in civil society are aware of this problem. But I think it will need a generational step, a generational change for us to see politicians being closer to people, being more normal. I know Thiago is a friend, so I know he's a very normal person. He behaves very normally, but I think there is still a lot of steps to be taken for people to feel closer to those who, in the end, represent them in Congress.
So just to add on that, also, as we're coming from a zero basis, it's easy to grow, right? So now we are 8 representatives. Before we were 0, and of course that we are still in a size that it's kind of easy to grow, but because we're still a very small group. But it's still a challenge to go beyond this, I don't know, 15, 20 representatives that we might have next year. And I think that because of that, we will have to create an environment in each one of the states, each one of the cities, where we were able to elect someone to nurture more and more people that will be willing to be in our places here, each election, right? And because of that, we cannot afford a representative that won't be following our votes, that will, start to defend things completely different from what they were supposed to. So each one of our elected politicians, they really have the responsibility to keep this hope of the people that elected them, keep this flame of these people, and not disappointing them, because they are already disappointed with a lot of other politicians here. But our politicians, they were able to keep track on what they told the electors in the elections. And I think that this kind of behavior and this kind of accountability, as you said, of what we're doing is really important for maintaining their hope on us and their trust on us. Because every time that we have a new voter, every time that we have a new organization or institution, liberal group or anything that starts to trust us, really have to maintain this trust and have their help in spreading the word with other people. So that's a kind of step-by-step process, again, convincing a person at a time, and making sure that those who are already converted and convinced, they will be kept with us.
Thank you for that statement, and hopefully the next step in that step-by-step movement will be the upcoming election. Thank you very much for joining us today. We got a great insight on the upcoming Brazilian election and the face of liberalism in Brazil today. Thank you very much for taking time out of your day and even time out of your voting in parliament to discuss this topic with us. If anyone wants to join the event on Israel, there's a link in the chat. Other than that, we'll hope to see you sometime soon again, and best of luck to the party. Thank you, Magno. Thank you, Thiago, and thank you, Mariana, as well. I wish everyone a great evening, and see you next time.
Thank you for the invitation. Bye-bye.
Yeah, it's always a pleasure. Bye-bye.
Thank you both. And as a Brazilian and a liberal, thank you for representing those values.
Thank you for inviting us, Mari. And thank you, Thiago, who is almost running for vice president. It's still not officially. Yeah. I just want to say to Justice that I didn't say anything. I didn't say he's a candidate.
Germany heard it first.
Yeah, he's probably going to run for vice president, but we don't know yet.
Yeah.
Thank you, guys.
It's in the process here.
Thank you.